Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session called Getting Educated While Incarcerated. I'm going to introduce myself, and I'm going to give a 3-minute orientation for what we're going to do. We hope to have about 25 minutes of conversation amongst us and leave the rest of the time open for you all to engage with us through questions and answers. My name is Robert Scott. I work at Cornell University, and I am here today in my capacity as the director of our prison education program. So I'm very much involved in education for those who are incarcerated in New York State. Happy to be with you. If you read the billing of this session, you may have noticed that there's a reference mainly to getting an education while incarcerated, the return of Pell Grants. There will be a lot more higher education in prison over the next 20 years than there was in the preceding 20 years because of the restoration of Pell Grants for people who were in prison. For 25 years, actually, this was a policy in the United States that you could not go to college or could not receive tuition assistance from the government. Now that that's being restored this year, we'll see an explosion of higher education in prison. And it's exciting to talk with you guys about what is possible there and beyond. Our panelists today are mainly going to speak from the perspective of having been through an experience of incarceration themselves. I've not been incarcerated, but I work with folks, and I've actually taught in both the New York and Illinois prison systems. And the two gentlemen who join us today are mainly going to speak about how that experience has informed their vision for the work that they then hope to then offer to the world as we talk today and this week about the changing nature of education and education technology and the role it can play and how to serve those who are not given access. Okay, so what I'm going to suggest, I was going to give you all of the questions in advance. I'm going to instead just say, why don't we do one question and then get into introductions and launch. The question for you all, how many people in this room, could I see a show of hands, have either been to a prison or a jail, visited, known someone in prison, or done some work in relationship to a prison? Look at that. It's almost every single hand in the room. As many hands as we have. Wow. Well, that's really actually both kind of inspiring and harrowing, the scope and scale of our incarceration system in America. I'm going to suggest that we do an introduction. I've introduced myself. Why don't we go Jodi and then Jason? And I would put it this way. I think that people came to this talk really interested in the title of Getting Educated While Incarcerated. So I think it's incumbent upon us to suggest if you could do something to satisfy the curiosity people probably have of where that experience of incarceration comes from for you, how you would describe it in relationship to the topics of this week and what you're here to do.
Well, I appreciate that, Scott. Again, my name is Jodi Anderson Jr. I spent 10 years inside of various adult and juvenile maximum security prisons, so from the age of 15 to 25. My journey through incarceration, I think, is a bit different from what people normally experience. So at the age of 15, I ended up getting into a GED course, got my GED at 16 years old, and then enrolled in one of the first collegiate programs inside of Department for Youth within New York State. Took a number of courses there, so from a community college, but it wasn't a degree kind of granting program. It wasn't until I graduated to the proverbial big leagues where they actually had a more robust programming for individuals who were incarcerated. Mind you, half of my 6th grade class ended up in the juvenile prison system. So when you think about the school-to-prison pipeline, very much a transition that everyone that I knew seemed to go through, and the conditions of being in an incarcerated setting reminded us very much of the projects or the group homes that we clearly grew up in, from having a lack of parenting or no parents, or parents suffering from various forms of mental illness. I don't think this is unique to me at all. It wasn't until I was transferred to Auburn Correctional Facility, which I think is one of the oldest prisons in the country, quite literally, and one of the worst. I just come out of solitary confinement and really wanted to reorient my life, to pursue education, I think full-time, not knowing how I was going to do that, but had some early experience inside a juvenile setting. And then Cornell had a prison education program, which I thought was clearly not real, right? There's no way that caliber of institution would be inside this setting offering education to individuals who are often forgotten and left out of some of the opportunities that society provides for its more privileged populations. Ended up joining the program, graduated within 2 years, one of the fastest graduates, became the youngest valedictorian, first black valedictorian, And then Cornell and a number of professors quite literally launched a campaign with New York State to get me out of prison 5 years early. Clearly that that worked. I ended up transferring to Cornell, studied there for 9 months, and then put in a transfer application to go to Stanford University, where I pursued a bachelor's degree in political science with a minor in Mandarin. And then we all know the world changed in 2020. I'll get more to that later, but I went to Reddit for a bit, and then came back to graduate school to pursue education technology with a focus on policy and technology. And here I am today. But I'll pass it over to Spyres because it's actually my guy right here. I appreciate that.
So at a young age, I always say this, is that I was born into like a welfare-driven family, had parents that had drug addictions. They both loved me. They never abused me, not taking anything from it. But one thing it did is it didn't give me a vision for like what was possible, what success was. Success to me was getting a job at the railroad down the street because they paid $10 an hour, and that was just like outrageous amounts of money to me in my head in the 90s. So when I wanted to get a job on the railroad, my grandfather said, hey, there's a rigging, pumping, piping class down at the local community college. If you did that, that would help you. And I went there, and I started doing the class, and I didn't know it, but I was studying to be a technician as I was taking that class. And I was also 18 and made the dumb decision to sell cannabis. Shouldn't have done it. I own up to it. But I got a 30-year sentence for doing it. And I'd say that's, I was guilty. I shouldn't have done it. But most people agree that's quite a harsh sentence. But it gets a little more harsher because when I got to prison, due to a weird policy in Illinois, my nonviolent cannabis offense rendered me more heinous than a murderer. And what really got me was I remember the day that I was sitting there and I wanted to go to school, and they said, no, because you have a Class X offense, you're legally unrehabilitatable. And they said, since you're legally unrehabilitatable, it means you are unable to learn how to be better. And so we prioritize the schooling seats for those who can learn. And I knew the lady's heart was breaking as she was saying this to me. She was just enforcing the policy. But fortunately, I'm a very arrogant and self-conceited individual, and I was like, I'm going to prove this sentence wrong because I saw other people get defeated by that sentence. And to me, I was like, I can win this. I can make the argument that a nonviolent cannabis offender should at least be on equal footing with a murderer. Because I believe in rehabilitation for everyone, but I think it's fair to say we should, be on the same footing. And so I wrote over 100 newspapers. I got the headline of the Chicago Sun-Times, Chicago Tribune, arguing here's policy reforms we need to do. And one of those policy reforms is in Illinois, you got 90 days good time if you earned a GED. And see, the recidivism rates were, if you didn't earn a GED and you paroled, it was 89%. That means within 3 years, 89% of people returned to prison that didn't have a GED. If they got their GED, it dropped to 47%. Still a bad number, but 42% points less. And then I'd have people tell me like, oh, that's just hug a thug, or they're just gonna game the system and get their GED to get out sooner. And so I made the argument of, you mean they're gonna learn how to read and write to game the system and get out sooner? And I'm serving 15 years. Like, if I do 14 years, 9 months instead of 15 years, do you think I'm gonna get out the door and go, you know what? If I'd have done 90 more days, I'd have learned my lesson. But I'm back down. Let's go do crime because I didn't do the last 90 days. But getting out and knowing how to read and write, feeling sufficient with filling out a McDonald's application, having the gratitude that you can look at your kids and say, you got this because I got a GED. I know you can do it too. That does way more to help society be a better place than 90 more days incarcerated would be, no matter what your crime is. So all that, nothing happened. But I refused to just sit in a cell and watch time pass me by. And so I looked around my cell and I said, man, what can I do? And I just started trying to learn, started reading math books. My mom sent me a Khan Academy transcript. I read that. And when I got out of prison, I met with some state lawmakers and state senators and stuff like that and had a 5-minute conversation. And next thing I know, all the policy reforms that I was arguing for my prison cell actually got implemented underneath the Rauner administration. And the year following that, our recidivism rates dropped by 17 points, got down in the low 30s, the best it had ever been in Illinois. So then I used that success, because you got to use anything you got in this world to try and make yourself better. And I put in for an application to a big name school, because the same way I wanted to prove that the impossible can happen when I was inside the joint, inside the incarceration system.
That's some Illinois lingo, by the way. We still keep the joint
so
up there.
Inside the incarceration system, I didn't want to see people get defeated by the line that they're not able to, rehabilitate themselves. I realized that society, by and large, has the same view, because I would meet people, and I'd said this to some of you as we were talking before it. They'd be like, Jason, you come off pretty polished. You don't sound like you did 15 years in prison. And then I ask them, oh, what did the last guy sound like you talked to that did 15 years in prison? And then they'd stop and go, okay, so I'm your sample size. So this is how we talk. And so, and after that, I got to Stanford. I met Jodi. We smelled each other out pretty quick. So I'm going to say this. Here's the biggest problem. A lot of people said, wow, you got into Stanford. But then I got to Stanford and I met this gentleman who also did time in prison, same year as the transfer class as me, and there was another guy who also was a felon, and there was a professor who was a felon. So over 10% of Stanford's transfer class that year was convicted people who'd been to prison. That beats the enrollment rate for freshmen. And so the problem here is that people don't have the vision to understand the opportunities they could have. And until you can visualize an opportunity as possible to actually follow through for you, you will never apply energy to make that happen in your life. So then when I left Stanford, I went into big tech, ran into a crazy billionaire guy who liked my funny jokes or my funny looks, one of those. And he said, let's start a company together. So I started a company called Training All People. We build VR and web simulations. But the main thing comes back to helping people see a vision for themselves that they've had yet to grasp for their own identity. Because the first person I ever met that I thought was successful, that believed in me and said I had potential, was the guy I was buying drugs off of. The next person I ever met that was successful, looked at me and believed I had potential, was my defense attorney saying, I'm so sorry they gave you all this time. You're better than this. If I had met the defense attorney first, I really think it would have changed things. So I focus on how do we impact people to give them visions in ways that they can't understand yet for themselves, so that they will apply energy and they will get themselves educated when you got the right resources. And I also had eggs for breakfast, if anyone's interested in that.
I know this is going to be one of those panels where we end up applauding a lot of the things said because of how inspiring it is to hear from you guys. I have the difficult job of trying to get us to talk about what you do now, and I guess I just want to plug as a aside, there's a 2:30 panel that's really explicitly about college in prison going forward. Jodi and I are both in that. Brad has organized it. This one is called Getting Educated While Incarcerated, but what I have been tasked with is to try to get our esteemed colleagues here to share with us what they now do. I think let's start with Jodi and then go back to Jason. What was it specifically about the incarceration experience that you had in your mind when you were at Stanford, when you were getting this elite education, that's now led to the work you're doing today? You've already made the point well, I think, Jason, that as I've done this work for 15 years, there's a tremendous number of people that have untapped potential inside of prison walls, and if they had been given other opportunities. The other thing we find is that experience of constraint and of the specific things that are within your sightline when you're inside of America's giant prison system actually inform solutions to the problems that we have with us today that people who haven't been incarcerated haven't been able to see. Jodi, might you be able to say a little bit about how you get from where you were to where you are now and what you're doing today?
No, for sure. I appreciate that context, Scott. So I typically look at this problem from the perspective of a youth, right? I still feel like I have not truly escaped my childhood in a sense. I think they say trauma is never dead. You usually bury it, but you bury it alive. And so whenever I'm thinking about this space, I'm always coming from the perspective of a young individual, right, who has no resources, right, who doesn't have any family connections, who has grown up inside of a system, right, a system that is largely oppressive, right, that disenfranchises them and removes them from society. And so the beginning of that school to prison pipeline, I think, is where it really starts. Because as youth, you're almost conditioned to go to prison, right? And so my education, even while incarcerated, like started as a kid, basically, right? And it's bringing educational resources into those settings that otherwise wouldn't be there. Sometimes at least in the juvenile space, the classrooms very reminiscent of the actual classrooms in society. So the public school education, clearly broken. But what we do now is, how do we build the skills, right, and equip younger individuals with a talent set to prepare them for jobs that are going to be lucrative, that are going to lead to social and economic mobility, and of course it's technology. And so we partner with Transforming Learning Accelerated at Stanford and their digital education initiative to bring computer science courses and design courses to incarcerated settings within the Bay Area and New York State. And the rationale for that is, if individuals are going to be confined, right, how do we make the best use of their time, right, so that when they do come out, right, because most individuals are returning to society, they actually have skills, right, that are going to allow them to surmount some of the roadblocks and obstacles that they're going to face. On the back end of that, for sure, is how do we then connect these individuals to employment opportunities, right? There are a number of systemic barriers that exist on the policy front, and Scott and Spyres, they can speak to that as well, that are difficult to unravel, right? And that takes time to do that. And although that's important, I think the more immediate solution is to actually help those individuals get employed so they could start generating some income, right? Because crimes of poverty often would lead people to prison in the first place, not being able to provide for themselves. So just releasing an individual back into the community, I don't think is like a wise decision, right? That's how we have those high recidivism rates, and that cyclical nature continues. And so then it's incumbent on us to partner with community organizations, right? And other like training programs, apprenticeship programs, et cetera, right? And that's, I think, being implemented statewide across the nation, connecting those youth to those resources, because there's a knowledge gap as well. Individuals don't know where to access resources. There are 1,000 applications to get anything that you want in life, but to get things that will actually help you out, almost non-existent, right? So it's incumbent on us technologists to actually build technology that helps connect people to those resources that they need in order to be successful. So on the employment front, for sure, but also rehabilitative services, et cetera, counseling, therapy, et cetera, to really support the individual in a holistic manner. And I'll stop there and probably pass it over to Spyres. But one thing I have noticed in this space is individuals need access to education above all else. Like, I think that is the driver of social mobility and economic mobility. So even after you are placed in employment, it's still vital for you to continue to upskill and reskill and to find other resources to continue to evolve your own skill set, right, so that you're prepared for this rapidly changing world. And so our approach starts inside of a prison, for sure, but then as an individual is transitioning, supporting them through that transition and through the life of their journey. I'll pass it to Spyres, but really appreciate that.
Could I ask you, could I just dig in for one more second before we give it back to Jason, and then we'll probably get closer to doing Q&A. Could you actually just name what your current project is and what you're doing? Because I think that's the most powerful
I was just about to say, Jodi's being humble. He's the CEO of Rézme.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, so co-founder CEO of Rézme. What Rézme does is it connects individuals who have been justice impacted to second chance employers, right? And so there's a number of initiatives across the nation where businesses are realizing that, one, there's an untapped workforce. Two, our bottom line is being affected by it, and there's $82 billion of loss in GDP because we're not hiring individuals, right, who have a criminal record, which is upwards of like 100 million individuals, right, who have had some infraction with the law. They're often denied employment because of background checks, and so what we do is we provide software that allows an individual to conduct an individualized assessment, right, in a specific framework built around rehabilitation that documents all of their positive attributes, their references, their awards, any certifications that they have in a digital format that can persist while they're incarcerated and as they transition into society. And then in addition to that, we also provide upskilling and reskilling courses through Cornell and Stanford Online for free. Right? So individuals could have access to those opportunities and then leverage those to get higher paying jobs and also see like new career opportunities. And then on the supportive end, like providing an entire network of service providers that we have vetted, that we know are doing work in the community, that are doing the heavy lifting, that have been doing the heavy lifting for years, and creating that real support network for individuals so that they don't return to society feeling alone and abandoned, that there's no one there for them. And we think technology is the way to kind of scale the good work that's already being done, and you know, we're happy to be leading the charge there.
Can I make one comment, and I'm going to hand it to Jason? At Cornell, I bet, and since a lot of you raised your hands when we talked about who's had any connection with the prison system, if you've ever done hiring, and you know what we do when someone applies for a job, you whip out your device, you do a quick Google search. So the first thing that pops up if a person's been formerly incarcerated, it's going to be the worst thing that happened. There's not going to be a date on it. It's not going to say that was in the 1980s. It might have an ugly mugshot from when that occurred. You know, this is sandbagging the whole economy, 100 million people. And so who's doing the work to put an alternative record out there? Well, it's going to be the visions of folks like Jodi, and this is why I hope you don't mind me saying, also working with Cornell University. Again, Stanford obviously has lapped us in terms of helping folks who are on the inside, but just really proud to see someone taking this to the next level, and with all the insights of having had the experience of had to go through it yourself. You want to say one more thing, and then we'll go to Jason, because he needs to get it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, one thing I think, like, 3 pillars, definitely education, research and policy, and technology. So the research and policy part is what I really appreciate, the relationship at Cornell. So I serve as the Director of Technological Innovation for the Criminal Justice and Employment Initiative. What we do is we bring technological solutions from the private industry, or the ones that we're actually building, so our own software, and implementing that at the state level, right? To make sure that employers are, 1, following the law, 2, that they're actually improving their hiring practices across their entire, like, you know, human resource departments, right? And then 3, empowering candidates, right, so that they can get access to these employment opportunities, removing some of the barriers that we see, these invisible black box barriers through machine learning and AI and applicant tracking systems, right, really dismantling those, providing alternative solutions that are technologically, you know, advanced, right, that are up, you know, with the times, and then implementing that within the state, right? We think that model will serve us well. We can implement that in various other states who are implementing fair chance policy, et cetera. So I do appreciate that. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks for unpacking it. And let's make sure we get the same depth of Jason's idea. So
one thing I always talk about, one of the biggest education moments I had in prison that affected where I'm at today wasn't inside of a classroom. And before I got up on this stage, I tried to walk around and talk to almost everyone here. So I heard what you came for. So let me try to also tie in the things that you guys came for. So I was sitting in my prison cell, and I was getting ready, like I thought I could go to college. I had this plan. And there was this CO that came by, CO Huff, pretty much a good guy. Like, he didn't, you know, he wasn't a negative person, but like he knew I had these big dreams of trying to go to like a big name college or something like that. And one day we were talking, and he said, Spyres, don't get me wrong, like, I like you, but like, that's like, next, tell me one person who's done it, right? And I had this weird moment where I realized the viewpoint that he had nothing to do with me, and as much to do with his understanding of how the world worked and what was possible for him. Because a lot of people would say that if I don't think I can do it and I'm at a higher social status than you, what are the odds that you can do it? And that does not make them a bad person for having this kind of ingrained understanding, right? It doesn't mean they're a negative person. They just have a misperception. So what I realized with that is the biggest thing you can do to help people, including myself, is to actually show them a path and a dream. So a lot of you are working with alternative kids, younger kids, and I'm going to tell you this, they're not afraid of long odds. They're not afraid of hard chances, because they'll tell you how they want to be a sports star, or they'll tell you how they want to be a rapper, or they want to do this, you know, YouTube influencer thing. And they understand that it's very unlikely and not many people achieve it, but that's the dream they want, because they can see a life where they would be happy if they achieved that. What we need to do is help educate people, this ties into me, about seeing a life where they can be happy that they haven't seen for themselves yet. So right now, if I told you to close your eyes and picture yourself on a construction site and you were going to be a carpenter for the day, you could probably do it. But if I told you close your eyes and picture yourself as a millwright, look around and tell me what tools are around you. What's your day going to be like? Most people probably can't do that. Maybe you can, I don't know. But if you weren't a carpenter, and if you've never worked as a carpenter, you're able to do that, you have a vision of what it is, you know, a kid can close his eyes and go, okay, I could maybe see myself being a carpenter and making that kind of money. I don't have all the skills, but I believe I could get there. The problem is unlike being a rapper or a rock star,
I am a rock star.
He raps better than he rocks, I see. So anyways, there's like 600,000 millwrights out there right now. It's growing at an 18% growth rate. There's almost as much of them as there is attorneys. In 5 years, no college degree, you can be making 6 figures. And it's a dignified living. Now, you probably don't know what it is. You service large equipment. If you hear about the semiconductor industry and the CHIPS Act, like that's basically employing millwrights. They call them industrial technicians. So the thing that I would say is my company set out to be like, how do we overcome the psychological barriers that are preventing people from understanding the dream of being happy for themselves and giving them an alternative path to get there? And in this world, I have noticed we're all vision-connected people. You can hear something 1,000 times, but a picture is like 1,000 words. And so I say, how do you focus on vision? How do you let them see actions? So like to plug my company, we made simulations. I have a booth out there. I'll bore you about it if you come by my booth. But the basic thing is I'm saying if you want to help people, do what my attorney did when I was getting sentenced. Look at them and help them understand there's other paths that can get you to being happy. And we can talk on high levels about like, you know, what's good for society to do on a macro level, blah, 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 blah. The number one thing you can do for a person is like, hey, I believe in you. You have potential. If you go this path, I can tell you people make good money and can take care of their family doing this. Boy, girl, black, white, that doesn't matter. And you're going to get a sense of dignity in it. And they might not understand what that word means when you say it to them. So I've been driving around in a car with people who work in construction or this and that. We drive by a building, and their arm shoots out the window, and you say, hey, you see that 4th floor right there? I did all the framing, blah, blah, blah. My buddy put in all the windows. What they see is something in society that they were a part of achieving and building that now stands as a testament to an impact that they made. I've never seen anybody drive by McDonald's and be like, I worked the lunch rush and I did the drive-thru. If they say it, they don't say it with a sense of pride. And there's nothing wrong with working at McDonald's, so I'm not taking that from them. But the thing is people know what McDonald's is. They know what Walmart is. They know what a carpenter is. The best thing you can do is expand their aperture and let them know what other pathways are there. And here's the worry I have. If you were able to close your eyes and picture the construction site and think about what a carpenter is but couldn't do it on a millwright, how is a 15-year-old kid on the south side of Chicago who just doesn't know if he wants to be in a gang going to figure that out? So do it for yourself. Help them see that path, you know. And I want to tell you this. I run a startup. It's hard. Every single day I'm worried that it's all going to fall in shambles, right? But
do not let this guy get away with that, right? I think like what they're doing fabulous work, right? Like actually like taking people from lower socioeconomic like status backgrounds and like putting them in like the jobs of the future, right? Careers that are very lucrative. So this guy's gonna be super humble, yeah. But
so one of the things that I'll leave it at this, and like, I'll say the awkward, uncomfortable thing in the room. Ready? I don't know if anyone noticed, but I'm actually white. So, right? And so I did 15 years in prison. And I'm going to keep it real with you. One of the things that dawned on me when I was in there is that I'm white, I'm clean cut, I'm articulate, I look safe. I went to prison for something that nobody actually really cares about. I sold pot as a teenager. And I said, I am going to get out there and I'm going to kick down a lot of barriers that our societal structure puts up for other people that don't have the same characteristics I just named. And then when I look at them and they point that out to me. I'm like, you know what? You're right. But did you do 15 years in prison? Do you got a felony yet? So you got things that I don't. And use that. Use everything you got. Use everything you got in this world to accomplish anything you want. And if you think it's going to be hard, the question becomes, are you happier where you're at, or are you going to be happier when you overcome it? Widen their aperture and give them the dream. That's what you can do.
Jason, could I ask you to unpack it a little bit more, and then we'll
Absolutely not, because I wasn't prepared. No.
And then we're going to take a few seconds. No, I'm the moderator, so I get to do this. Specifically, what I've thought when I've learned about your work, and I want you to just describe it a little bit more in detail with the virtual reality and everything, is our guys get out of prison. We work in men's prison, so I use the male pronouns. And if they're not in New York City where there's a subway all over town, they generally aren't allowed a lot of movement when they're on parole real fresh. So for that first 6 months, there are restrictions on curfew, using a car, all this kind of stuff. So the ability to go see that other future is curtailed. And it sounds like the thing you've got, not only for young people who haven't yet been to prison, but for folks who are coming out, who have their movement constrained by the post-prison surveillance and custody of the state, could also benefit from having a chance to see other workplaces through a model like the one you're promoting. Could you just describe a little bit in detail what it is you do?
All right. So my
We'll do
company's
Q&A.
My company's called Training All People. I believe, short acronyms, something easy to remember, tap into talent, tap into this, blah, 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 blah. So we make 3D simulations that can be on a desktop. We bought a computer off Amazon that was refurbished, 7 years old, runs on an i3 processor. All of our simulations ran perfectly, okay? It also works on a VR headset, but the name of my company is not Training All People who can afford a VR headset. Right? It's not Tap VR. The name of my company is Training All People. So I made sure it's accessible on things that are like a cheap 7-year-old laptop. I wish I could get it on mobile, but it impacts the learning experience. I don't want to water it down. So what I do is there's an 18-year-old kid. We met him. We told him about the industry, kind of like what I told you. My chief product officer was actually in the room. We met him. And we told him about it. And he was like, do you think I could do that? I was like, well, let's try. And we gave him simulations. See, what we do is we build things that allow you to envision it. So you'll see people that think they want to be a dental hygienist. And then they're going to the room and watch a tooth get yanked out of a guy's mouth. And blood. And they're like, I'm out. I'm out. Well, if you can't envision what that job's actually going to be like, you're less likely to aspire to achieve it, or you're going to attrition as soon as you get there. So we build simulations that allow them in real time to see what these environments are like and get a view for it. So the semiconductor industry would go into career days and go, hey kids, this is a great thing. You can make the semiconductor chips that go in your cars, your laptops, your washers, your dryers, your smartphones. It runs the world. The CHIPS Act just passed $66 billion. This is going to be great. You can make 6 figures, no college degree. All you got to do is operate a lithography machine that does doping and implanting and uncross-sawed a 300-millimeter wafer, and you got this. They go to their table, not a single kid walks up to it. Because I didn't even know what the heck they said, and I graduated from Stanford. I can at least add, and I don't know what he meant. But what we do is we go, hey, check this out. See that? They look. Do you know how to do a first-person shooter game? Yeah, this simulation is set up the same way. That machine right there is a producer. Weighs about 100,000 pounds, costs $10 million. The chamber lid's right here. Open the chamber lid. Grab that flashlight. Can you see where the O-ring's messed up? Yeah, cool. See that thing below it? That's an isolation valve. Okay. That's where stuff comes out of the chamber. If there's a thing that's like this, level that out. Okay, they do that, they get off. Now, they understand they're going to be working in a factory setting. They have an understanding of how big the machine is. I can raise a chamber lid. I can turn a valve. And if they close their eyes and are told they're on a millwright site, they can tell you what the work's going to be like. So that's what my company does. We open the aperture using technology. And one of the things, we're in Texas Instruments right now, and we got them to drop their college degree requirements, and we literally got an 18-year-old kid hired with no experience, and he interviewed better than the kids who graduated from college, because when he said, oh yeah, no, I like the way the producers look, and raising the chamber lids, they're like, what? And it's he was able to talk knowledgeably because he could see this job. So that's what my company does.
It's excellent. We have about 5 minutes left, and I want to say it is an odd bedfellow, ed tech, and prison, because the prison is such a technology-averse space. It's actually a space of depravity. Many states don't even have computers or tablets at all in their state prison systems. It's just coming in now. So it's really inspiring to hear you guys both proposing solutions in this realm. Think for a second if you might have a question that would really benefit from one of the few chances to get called on in the next 3 or 4 minutes, because that is all we're going to have. I'll let you think so that you have a good formulation.
I only like hard, awkward questions, so please ask the hard ones. And then I'll give them to Jodi.
Or we'll continue to filibuster and tell you things about.
Can I speak to the privilege point when Spyres was like,
yep.
he's a Caucasian male? I just discovered that just now. Didn't even realize that. No,
it
it's got
happens.
for 5 years.
I tried to keep it low key.
Right, very strange. But what I do appreciate is once you realize you have privilege, right? Whenever that realization comes about, I think it is like a moral imperative for you to leverage that, right? To benefit society. Maybe that's too large of an ambition, but at least the people around you. And so what I appreciate about individuals, not only like what Spyres is doing, but also like technology companies, in general, right? Like, how do we prepare for a society, right, that is more advanced than it is today? And I think that pervades like the culture. And so,
I'm gonna flip the script. I'm gonna cut you off.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so he said like realizing you have privilege is like something gives you a responsibility, right?
I think so.
I also think realizing you have a disability gives you a responsibility. And I met this well-articulate gentleman who transferred into Stanford, did 10 years in New York, and he wasn't telling anyone that he'd been incarcerated. And one of the things I told him is I remembered a story where a CEO told me, or a CO, correctional officer, told me I wouldn't be able to do it because who's done it? And I told him I'm very vocal about my story because when that CO tells the next one, tell me one person who's done it. Hopefully they can name a name. And so if you have an impediment, if you are black, if you have something holding you back and you achieve success and you've been to prison, share that story. Because we're not special. The only reason we're special is because we're the only ones talking and loud about it and not afraid. Like I said, 10% of Stanford's transfer class this year. What are the odds that Jodi's in New York, I'm in Illinois, 2 different set of circumstances, and we both end up at Stanford together at the same time transferring in? And I want everyone to know, yes, it's hard, yes, it's unfair, but there has been someone who's done it.
Yeah, well, one thing about that, even though it seems like we come from like 2 different paths, I think a lot of our lives are quite similar, right? Like we all have the same influences, we all exist in the same society, we're all interacting with the same systems, and so I think there's a lot of camaraderie to be had there. But one thing about, I think, utilizing our own networks to help support the communities around us, when I transitioned back into society, I had every resource you can imagine. Like, I had a job right away. I had 2 phones. I had laptops. I was invited to, attend courses at Cornell. I was put in contact with the mayor. I was giving free housing, like literally everything. So if you want someone to succeed, and maybe you don't have the advantages that that stem from coming from like a huge university and a support network like that. But I think all of us, right, know deeply that if you want someone to succeed, you give them absolutely everything that they need, right? And if you have access to privilege or any resource or opportunity, like, you should absolutely do that. And the odds that person is going to fail, I think, diminish considerably. So if there is some kind of call to action, it is to leverage all the resources you have to uplift the people around you, because their actions impact all of us, right? And like, we have to all exist in this world. Boom, there goes the hands for questions.
Yeah, now that there's 30 seconds left, we have people that want to say. Could I actually make a suggestion, though, out of the respect for everyone? Why don't we actually wrap, and then you guys could immediately go and talk to these 2 folks and get deeper than we probably will by rushing through the final seconds here. But I do want to say, I think you guys ended on a wonderful note, which is the overwhelming emphasis on technology in today, and the number of people, I'm sure you guys both know, who've been incarcerated since the mid-90s. If you got incarcerated in the mid-90s, you never had a cell phone. You never saw the internet in the way that we've all lived with it. People are coming out against tremendously well-organized digital society with almost no experience of that, and it's visionaries like these two guys that are starting to think through the tremendous gap that's going to have to be waged to put what Jodi's calling doing everything possible to make it possible for folks to get back into the economy and society. Final word goes to Jason.
Another thing, these two have a panel on Pell Grants, I believe at 2:30 today, so if you
2:30, yeah.
interact with them.
To be continued.
I have a booth at 2:09, but I also do a workforce VR demonstration tomorrow that starts at 10 a.m. in the Meta Lounge. I think we go on at like 10:15. So if you want to interact with us, and my name is Jason Spyres, Jodi Anderson, you can find us in the app as well.
Boom.
Apologies to these two. Come on up and have a chat. Thank you.